Why resilience? It's been my passion, my world. I was in corporate world and dealing as a senior middle manager with the complexities of both running large teams, but also with changing strategy. And that was several years ago. And it's why I came into coaching in the first place, because it's really all about, you can only grow, or you can only, an organization can only take as much change on as its people can sustain. And that's really what it's about. We see this. You've all been talking about pressures. We see people have used this for years, unprecedented change and complexity, but I've got two teenagers and I've never been in a world where they are going to inherit such complex issues that we've managed to create. We've been in a relatively stable period, politically and economically and socially in the world for many years, and I'm 55, and they are inheriting something which is just so very, very different. So definitely that. The notion, do you remember this work-life balance? The idea, I think, got floated about 70s or 80s, and people still cling on to that possibility. Stuckness, dysfunction, aggression, all the aspects that you've been talking about that are related to stress reactions. Overwhelm or burnout, not exactly the same. Burnout, as we were hearing this morning, is definitely with a trauma legacy and therefore can be re-triggered. Okay, overwhelm is not the same level, but both are really serious. From an organizational point of view, mediocrity, mediocre results, not coping, clinging back to command and control, trying to get better at it and landing back at something like coping, but all you've done is create mediocrity in your systems and processes. And more recently, we've been hearing a lot about apathy. So, the world is a very complex place right now. And the problem that we see is this difference between demand versus capacity. So on the right-hand side in the blue here, you've got, in a varied level of the demand upon people's resilience, whether that's individual, team, or organizational level, really rising and actually being so variable you don't even know what it is. And the capacity of people on the left-hand side, you individually or whatever, can grow, but it's also variable depending upon the context. I mean, very small things like sleep, which is actually huge in well-being terms. If you've had a bad sleep, last night, you will not be as resilient today. So, we're talking about that capacity for change, capacity to be able to embody, to adapt, whilst really being coherent. So somebody else talked about values, really be coherent with who you are and what you're about, okay? So we see that kind of fluctuation, and that's where we think the problem is. And the solution organizationally is much more about healthy organizations. Okay, so we have 3 start points organizations come in on this stuff about. So well-being is one, and it's really been around for a long time, but I've been a bit on the side. More recently, organizations, Shell, PwC, have placed this much more into the heart of their day-to-day business. So really taking well-being part of their performance culture, etc. Performance measurements, well-being here. Change, you've said it all today. And culture, we're now competing for talent, that 20% churn that's higher in different industries. Can you get hold of the right people? Can you actually create something that is out with a single leader or single set of team leaders who can actually create the systems and processes around being a healthy organization? This notion of a healthy organization is taken from Josh Berson's work in Deloitte, and his work has shown that there are pretty full-on fantastic outcomes as a result of bringing this in, okay? So, double the potential of financial targets, but if you come into the blue, 10 times more likely to have lower rates of absence. Almost 3 times more likely to be able to adapt. So this is survival through to growth, through to thriving, you know, and taking account of the employer-employee sort of relationship here. Now, what is a healthy organization? We are debating that in 2 days' time, but actually, you know, for you as a potential resilience coach, what does it mean? It's just such glorious work. You could be working with somebody who's not in a great state. You could be working with leaders who are in a good state and wanting to embed this across the board. You work as systemically. So us individually, we are a system. You know, with the somatic, with the cognitive, you're taking the whole person and working with that, okay? All the context that somebody operates in, their personal life, their work life, etc. Even if sponsored from an organizational point of view, Rebecca and I have just been talking with a client about that. Actually, you know, we know that resilience work brings into account those personal drivers, pacing the work according to the capacity of the client. Coaching is a lot about learning. And if you're not coping, you don't have any capacity to learn. So actually, what do you do as a coach then? How do you help the client? There's listening, yes, but how do you actually equip them to unlock their resourcefulness? Working with groups and teams, enabling resilience between and around them, and actually working on your own resilience. That's what we're about. We have a community of practice, just under 100 people. Some of those are internal, and some of you may be today, bringing this into organizations in really different ways than a typical coaching contract. Could be policy changes, could be drop-in sessions, all sorts of ways in which you can work in resilience. And we as a community are pretty active monthly and then quarterly and then yearly. We do things that actually share best practice and learn. And we are often in the kind of chewing of stuff together. So, you know, you learn a ton on the accreditation program, and then you almost kind of come out and begin to hone that practice together. Just to say where the basis of this comes from, this is very long-standing research since 2009. The new resilience dynamic model, it shows a spectrum of resilience levels, and we can be in multiple places here depending upon the context, ranging from really where there's incoherence and breakdown all the way through to breakthrough, where somebody is at ease with themselves, grounded and psychologically safe no matter what's going on. And to work across that is a lot of what the accreditation program is about, learning about what each of these levels are, what is required from that from a resilience point of view, from our research. And that is drawing on the work of the Resilience Engine. So this is our second research model, which actually describes how to build resilience. Now, it isn't you dunk somebody in and you get it all, but rather these are, if you like, a framework in which you as a resilience coach can lean on and into to say, well, do you know what? We've got to start at the adaptive capacity side. Therefore, I'm going to get into, say, refreshing energy work, but also really looking at prioritization and releasing some adaptive capacity in the client. I might not go to and dive into values and beliefs straight off the bat if somebody isn't resourced enough. So your choice points around here are always being brought through in the learning through the accreditation program. So we're talking about capacity for change. We know from the research it underpins sustainable performance, and it's absolutely knitted with well-being and self-care. It's dynamic, it's learnable, it's systemic, and we know some key kind of direct drivers. So energy being one of them. If you can up the energy, you're upping your resilience. Upping the energy means you've got more adaptability in you. Okay. So all of these things become available to you as a result of going through the accreditation program, and then you are licensed to use this research in your own practice in whichever way is appropriate for you on successful completion. So that's what we're about. We're thrilled that you're here, and over to Rebecca to explain more about the program itself, and I'll be your lackey and do the slides. Rebecca.
Thank you. There was one quick question actually, Jenny, from Adrian, which we probably haven't got time to go into. So I could just say you need to join the program to find out. What is 2 plus
Ah,
7 plus 1?
yeah, 2+7+1. It's a mnemonic that's a helpful way, Adrian, for you to get in and around the core things, if you like, internal personal beliefs and values, about, which of those, under all of the personal things that we might hold, are the real key unlockers of resilience in any one individual. Okay, so it's just a little mnemonic for us all to remember, the 2+7+1 equation, and makes a nice number of tens. Yeah, there you go.
We like to make it practical, right? Get our arms around it. So
Yeah, exactly.
thank you, Jenny. And again, just pop questions in chat as we're going, and then I'll answer them after each particular slide as we go. So I'm going to take you through in a bit more granularity about what each of the modules is and what it involves, so you get an experience of what that flow looks like and what the learning experience will feel like on this course. And I'd also just like to touch on kind of what that learning experience is about, because we don't just sit and teach you. You know, there's a requirement to be really in the work with this, and so I just wanted to touch on kind of what that looks like and feels like, so you understand that before you walk into the program. So as Jenny said, it's an 8-month program. We kick off in February, and there are 5 key modules, all happening over a morning for 3.5 hours. As Jenny's already talked about, pacing is key. So we always have a good break for reflection. That we really encourage that throughout the program, to move, to stretch, to think, to reflect, and come back for the second session feeling refreshed with all your questions. The only difference on that is module 3, where we go through all the accreditation basics, and that is a shorter session. And we also have a faculty session with Jenny, where you can quiz her as much as you want about the research and what that means and what you've been noticing in your work through this. So I'll take you through the modules to begin with. So we kick off with module 1, which is really kind of getting under the skin of resilience. You know, our experience of resilience is so driven by our culture, how we grew up with, our backgrounds, our working experience. So this is a point at which we start to create almost a common language about resilience and what it means to us, and also an opportunity to get to know each other, because we're going to be spending a lot of time together. And it's a really good point to which just to talk about what resilience really means to us in that process. And we also just start to bring in the resilience dynamic, because that's so fundamental to the work, how you diagnose somebody, where they're at in their particular resilience, and also really start to ask you to start connecting with your own resilience. You know, one of the biggest pieces that I often hear participants talk about, and I went through myself, which is you kind of enter this program thinking about the people that you're working with, whether that's an external coach, an internal development. I see we've got a neuroscientist, we had a psychotherapist last year. You know, lots of people come onto this course for different reasons. And one of the biggest benefits is often for ourselves. You know, how we actually grow and sustain our own resilience. So we ask you to really reflect on yourself during this. So module 1 really starts to kick that off with. And we also just introduce ethics very early on. You know, as any coach will tell you, ethics is a fundamental part of, you know, what we do and what we should believe in. And we start to get people to think about ethics very early on. You know, if you're working with somebody at fragmentation, you know, we really need to be clear on not only where our boundaries as a coach or as an internal practitioner sit, but also where's our own capacity for that work ourselves. You know, where is our learning at the moment? Where is our own resilience for that work? So we kick that off really early. So then we go into module 2, which is really exploring the relationship between resilience, stress, and well-being. There was a lot on the chat at that early stage that I saw talking about that, and particularly our own physical responses to stress and how that links. So we get under the skin of how the actual resource, how the your resilience well-being really connects with stress and well-being. So we look at the research, we look at the science of stress, but then we also start to look at what that means in terms of the barriers to our own resilience. So it's really practical as we go through that. So we really start to talk about that relationship between resilience, stress, and well-being, and how that relates to your own work. So we really get to start to think about what that means in your own context, right? We will do some more ethics work here. So we've got some great case studies, videos, and we will ask you all to go out into groups where you really get under the skin and really discuss what that ethical piece looks like. And we make no apologies for making that a core theme throughout the work that we do together, because it will come up time and time again in the modules and then again in supervision. Then as we move into module 3, this is the nitty gritty. This is where we really clear on what's expected of you to be able to pass that accreditation. And we are really clear with that. There's no kind of close, smoke screens about this. We have 9 very clear criteria that you're expected to produce at the end of that, and I'll go through what that looks like in a moment. But that's really clear, and you get the opportunity to ask lots of questions in that module as well. And then this is when we build in the resilience engine alongside that resilience dynamic, and the combination of those two and how they interact is absolutely core to this work. So those 2 research models that Jenny just talked about, we will talk about them individually, and then we will really see how they interact, because it's only then that you start to think, okay, I've diagnosed this, so where does the work start? Where's their capacity for that work? It's one of the key things I really noticed myself as a coach and working at team levels with individuals and with organizations, which was, what drew me to this program was I often found people were a bit stuck. And that was frustrating as a coach, frustrating for them. And when I started to look at this program, what it meant is that I realized that actually sometimes the pacing of the work, their capacity for the work, where we started it, they weren't able to access that work, right? So whether I use this really explicitly with clients or implicitly, I always have this resilience lens. It's impossible to leave behind once you're in it. So every piece of work I do, I've always got that in my head, and you can just incorporate it in different ways, but it just enables you to meet the person where they are at and enable you to do the work that's really important in that moment, rather than try and keep forcing against something that's just not going to work for them. So this is a really important module where I think you really start to see the two combine. And, you heard Jenny's passion earlier. What I connected with when I spoke to Jenny about the program a number of years ago was actually that vision, which is this program is really based in science and deep research, right? Over 10 years worth of research into this program. And Jenny's vision, which is, I want to make it really practical for people, right? I want to take this research and make it really impactful in people's lives. So even the smallest change can make a really big impact. So you'll see during the program that yes, we will give you the research. Yes, we will go through the models. Yes, we will look at the science of stress and everything that brings. And you will leave the program knowing how you can actually incorporate it into your work. All right. So it's not just theory. It's like, okay, how are we going to use this? What does it mean for me? And then the final one is we have a lot of fun in this module. Okay. So we take tools, some tools you'll be really familiar with, others that you won't. And we look at them with a resilience lens. So we try them out together, we practice them, we see which ones that we connect with. And in this module, I think what you'll find is a real understanding that all of your experience, all of your knowledge that you've developed over those years can be really incorporated into this work. This isn't standalone. We're not saying to you, leave everything behind that you've ever done and just do this, right? This is the moment where you say, okay, I do all of this work already. How do I bring resilience into that and make it fly even further? Okay, so this is a really fun module just to finish on, which takes all of that and makes it into that really practical application. So that's a rattle through the modules. So Jenny, would you mind just going through onto the next, unless there was any questions specifically about the modules there?
None for the moment. I think everyone's just in receive mode and probably chewing it. But feel free to pop anything into the chat room as we go. So
okay, thank you. So this is actually, before I just kind of go through each of these pieces, I just wanted to touch on that final point that I said about really starting to think about how you incorporate this into your practice, because this is so individual to you. you know, the groups that we have in these programs is diverse, and that's what makes it so fabulous. You know, the experience of each individual combined together just creates the most rich conversations. The learning that we have as a group is fabulous, and you'll see in a moment that we don't just have the modules, we have all of this other work within that. And I was just trying to think this morning about how to kind of bring to life that learning experience, and there was just two sort of short stories that I just wanted to share with you. One was from a participant this year, which I'm going to read their words because otherwise I won't do service to them, which is, you know, I had no idea that this program would have such a positive impact on my own life as well as my clients. I realized quite quickly that I had work to do on myself to help me grow my capacity to keep change with the demands on me both in and out of work. Yeah. And this program doesn't just stop at the date in which we finish the program, right? That is the starting point. And you will see there that we call it a learning essay assignment. And that's because, you know, you don't leave the program as this fully formed practitioner. We have to make sure that you are a safe pair of hands to practice the work and to be able to use the research and the models that Jenny talked through. But we are at that point of learning. About ourselves as well as our clients. So you will take as much for yourself as the people that you are working with through this program. That's been a huge game changer for me in terms of my own well-being, my own ability to manage my stress, my addiction to adrenaline, and how I kind of manage that for myself. So go into it knowing that you'll be asked to really self-reflect for you as well. And then the other question that we get asked a lot during the program is, you know, when we're asked to do the group work or the client work is, can you just give me a structure, an outline? And I can use that for my own work, right? And we really resist that because if I give you an example of the types of essays that I've been reading over the last few years, you'll see why it's not okay for us to just hand over neatly formed modules for you to run, all right? So I can read two essays, both contain huge rigor in terms of their thinking, in terms of how they experience the models, in terms of the research and everything that they've learned. But I can have one that is using the research and all of the accreditation work with on a systemic team level with a huge corporate organization, right? And then I can be reading an essay of somebody who's incorporated it into their kind of wonderful business, which is a walking coaching business, all right? So you can see already that, you know, the content is as rich for those two individuals as anyone. But if we just handed them a neatly formed package, we wouldn't have got that unique kind of ability to take it into your work. So we will constantly be asking you during these modules, what does this mean for you? What does it mean for the people that you are working with? So yeah, Jenny, you came off mute?
No, no, I'm going to, you know, keep going.
So yeah, so I think, you know, you will have a real experience of deep understanding of this work, but also a practical component really to really take into your existing work. That's what I'd say. So just really briefly, the additional components that you'll have within this, you'll be expected to do some one-to-one work with some clients, minimum of 4 hours. Some people do more, but we ask a minimum of 4 hours plus that preparation time. So you will be asked to kind of seek case studies, individuals to work with, to start using this work with. You'll also be asked to do either group or team work, you know, two very different things. So some people are systemic team coaches, other people want to work with groups within their organizations, but we ask for a minimum of 3 hours engagement. So that might be 2 workshops, for example, that you do, or it might be incorporated into some team coaching that you already do, but at least 4 hours of engagement, 3 hours of engagement, and then that preparation time within that. So you get those 2 experiences of how it can be developed into your work. You also get 120 minutes of supervision time with one of the faculty. So you can bring any of the challenges around some of the client work that you're doing. It can be just yourselves, how you're experiencing resilience. So you get that through that program, which is incredibly beneficial. And then one of the pieces that I really love about this is we do 3 90-minute group supervision sessions. So where we really come together and create that space to think, to ask questions, to support each other. People can bring case studies where we really get the opportunity to talk about, people bring case studies that maybe aren't going so well, and we can just come together to really support and think through that. So we get those 3 90-minute sessions. They all happen after module 5. So there's that ongoing support as you are doing your client work, and then also into writing your final submission. And then finally, we use Slack. Some of you will be familiar with Slack and use it all the time, and others won't be so familiar. I was an absolute novice with Slack and now use it all the time. So as somebody that doesn't love the IT world, even I could use it. So, but it's great. You know, we share conversations, materials. We have kind of faculty Q&As on it. We ask people to be in groups. So it's a place for us to connect. And then we also use that as a community of practice once you actually pass and become an accredited practitioner. So you'll see that there's huge amounts of support and ongoing work as a group together. You know, people often kind of meet up outside of the modules as well. There's great relationships formed. Johnny can talk to you, but you know, he's working with another accredited practitioner now. You know, there's relationships that are formed that are fantastic in terms of that workspace as well. So those are the additional components. And then finally, what do you need to do to actually pass this? So there are 3 key parts of this. The first is that we ask you to write a positioning statement of about 600 to 1,000 words. And that is really just to talk about your definition of resilience. What does it mean to you? And how are you going to use this with your work? So this is how are you going to incorporate this resilience thinking and approach into your current work? So that's that piece. Then we have the learning essay assignment, 2 to 2,500 words. And as I said earlier, we call it a learning essay assignment for a reason. You know, we're not after the list of all the practical things or the achievements that you've had or, you know, anything like that. This is kind of really getting under the skin of what have you learned? Where have you got it right? What have you noticed that wasn't going so well? Yeah, that's what we're looking for in this essay, not a fully formed, perfect practitioner, all right? We're really clear on that we need to understand that you are a safe pair of hands, that you understand the boundaries of the work, your capacity for the work within that, and what have you learned, and that you really understand the research and the models to be able to use them. And we also know that this is the start of a process, not the kind of end of it. So there'll be kind of, you know, you then join a community of practice where you can really grow as practitioners in this. And finally, we do need the supporting evidence from the clients that you work with, from the people that you work with, to show that. And then what do you get after that? So I love this first, so I'm just going to read the sentence because I think it just sums it up. But you get the confidence to practice in both a safer, holistic, and indeed, where appropriate, more challenging way. Yeah, that's something I've really noticed for myself and other colleagues that I'm now working with through this, which is, you know where you can challenge, even with somebody that maybe is, more vulnerable. So it's a fantastic lens to work with people in that space. You get 60 hours of ICF CCEU, can never say that properly, accredited hours. So we became accredited through ICF, so that goes towards that. And then you get a 3-year renewable license to practice using the Resilience Engine research models. So you do have to reaccredit after 3 years, but you get all the models, you can use the materials, the know-how, the community of practice, the work that comes with that. So you get that as well. And then finally, Jenny talked about it, but there really is a community. It's called community of practice for a reason. We meet regularly. Some of us work together, we share information, we reflect. I think we got each other through the pandemic, we met weekly. So we really get to learn from each other, we get to know each other, and we share best practice together. So it doesn't stop when the program stops. That is just the start of this program, which I think gives real depth and breadth to your experience of it.
Lovely.
So rattle through.
So, and I'm aware that you're probably, again, just chewing the fat over. I would just maybe give yourselves a moment of thought of kind of, are you hearing the things that you need to hear? Mandy posted the dates about the accreditation program itself. I'm sure you'll have follow-up questions, but, is anything burning right now that you need to know about? Please don't be shy. You're silent, we're talking, but we don't really mean to be. We'd love to hear your views, and as you're doing that, I'm just going to then hand into Johnny, and actually maybe we don't even need to share, Johnny, because this is our last slide, so I might actually stop sharing just so we can really see you, well, and everybody else here. So yeah, tell us about your experience.
Yeah, so it's great just actually hearing back the two of you, Jenny and Rebecca, kind of taking everyone through the course again. And when I was looking for a kind of really thorough program, because I run a small practice as a one-to-one kind of leadership coach, working fundamentally with entrepreneurs and founders, at startup and scale up phase. And also I'm a systemic team coach. And what I'd found was that in my work, entrepreneurs particularly were going through their roller coaster. Everything is changing for them all the time. They're constantly kind of pivoting. And for them, their resilience was very much an area that I wanted to understand how to work with better. And also because I'd recently kind of accredited in the team coaching side of things, I wanted to be working with teams as well in terms of their resilience. So I'd kind of done quite a bit of research trying to find a program that I thought was appropriate for that. And then I kind of had found the book, read the book, which I loved, The Resilience Dynamic. But then I kind of was hungry for more. Funnily enough, even though I'd trained in systemic team coaching, it hadn't been with the AOEC, it had been with someone else. And then so I came across the AOEC. I think I came to probably one of these. But most importantly for me, I wanted something that was really something that I could integrate and use in my practice. I wanted something that was a practical application. And actually, to Rebecca's point, I was one of those coaches that wanted a framework, a kind of a slam dunk kind of process end to end. I actually said, that's exactly what I want. But funnily enough, I initially resisted the kind of making it my own and really understanding it. But going through the journey over the 8 months was fantastic, really understanding, kind of what resilience is, understanding it in myself, which really made it a great experience so that I could then really start to recognize where my clients were at in terms of their resilience and be working with them either implicitly or explicitly. So not only have I now kind of integrated it into my toolkit, whereby I can use it either implicitly or explicitly, but also, on the journey of the program, I got the confidence. I think that was the thing that you had in your slide there, Rebecca. I have the confidence at the end of this program now. I started in February, accredited, I think, in August. During the program, not only were there great other coaches on the program that I actually, two of them that I partnered with in terms of doing the case studies, where we did workshops with two different companies, two different organizations in person. So kind of post-COVID, we were kind of coming out of COVID. It was in person doing these workshops, which was brilliant. One was to a group of 12 people, another was to a group of 18 people. And what I did was, in terms of partnering with these different coaches that I'd met on the program, we really kind of learnt together and integrated what we were learning together. And it was a wonderful journey. So, and this gave me the whole process of the modules that Rebecca's taken you through and doing those case studies and the learning essay. That whole process I found was very thorough, at times intensive. There was a real kind of like trying to integrating that learning, but that whole experience of going through that journey and really having that hands-on practical experience has enabled me to feel very confident now as a coach, either one-to-one or with teams or with groups. And what I'm finding at the moment, which is really interesting, is that more and more people are saying, we had like 2 or 3 proposals out recently. Rebecca, you mentioned that, with a co-coach who's also a team coach. So the two of us are working at maybe kind of bringing resilience into our team coaching, but also with another co-coach that I worked with on the program, and we're looking at working again at a leadership level with resilience. So, but I'm finding You know, I literally just came off a call just now talking about a program that we're working on with a group, not a team. And then they actually said, do you know what, that's great, but what about resilience? This is an area. And so I'm able to then in the moment to go, okay, and to talk about it and to explore it. But it's hitting my radar more and more than I thought it would, particularly with leadership and resilience. And so, you know, for me, the experience of the whole program, most importantly, has given me the confidence, not just the theory. I think that's the important thing for me. And then the learning essay really was that, in a sense that it took me a while to write. I really kind of drew on the case studies, drew on the experience and all of the different tools that we'd used. I think actually, you know, and it really helped me to think it through. I had to go back on a couple of points after submitting it, which was great. But, you know, again, it was my learning. And now I'm, you know, in the world, you know, bringing resilience coaching into my toolkit and wanting to do more and more with it. So that's been my journey so far. I think, Rebecca, your point of tailoring it, integrating it, you know, for me, that's what I found is it's very flexible, and it does work with my coaching toolkit. I'm an ICF PCC level kind of coach, and for me it works very, very well. I also kind of trained in NLP, so there's different tools, and the pacing cycle, the learning cycle, the dynamic, it just adds so much richness and enhances. And I think, Rebecca, you use that phrase, a lens. It really has given me a lens to work with on an ongoing basis with my clients, and really a sensitivity to where my clients are and where they are showing up each time I see them. Because resilience is dynamic, one of the key things I learned, you know, I get a sense of where they're at, and just really, I often now will check in with clients, you know, where's your resilience today? And you'll learn a lot about how to do that, but on the program. But, you know, I really enjoyed it. It was a great program.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Johnny. I mean, it's always just so heartening when we're, you know, in the community, you know, and we're learning both about the experience of the program and then actually how it comes through in the work, both indirectly and directly. So what we're looking for is you're learning out of it, and therefore what are you learning about being a safe pair of hands? So we're just looking for triangulation, that you've actually done the work, that's all. And it's just really for an audit check and against ICF criteria. So there's some very practical things you can do in internal organization or as a coach. I mean, there's some tools that you can adopt, right? And I think that's very interesting. So you can, I mean, some of our internal practitioners offer resilience programs actually every 2 months, you know, they're coming in and doing things. You could be using, once you've done further CPD, the Resilience Dynamic Questionnaire, and that's in a self-assessment and an accelerator into the work. So there's quite a lot of tools. Then there is a thing about actually your own sense checking, which is what Johnny referred to, which is what is the capacity of this person or this team right now? And therefore, what is the work that is available to them? Now, it's very non-linear resilience. It isn't just like you do this, therefore, and then you do that, and then da, 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 da. What you find is there's quite a bit of sort of jiggling about initially and getting things more aligned, and then there's a whoosh, right? And there's a sort of real leap. Pacing, sense checking, being rigorous about your choice of intervention is the thing across the whole board that anything could do, you know. Thereafter, you know, it can take you into all sorts of domains, Bernie. So it will hone your understanding of systemic sort of influencing. You know, it can join into deeper works about mental health. Other things that, you know, on leadership on the other end. PwC have embedded a module directly in that's a resilience module, but they also have within all their director and program partner programs as a golden thread, for example, you know, in their work. So, you know, all their sort of leadership programs have a reference to it. So there are multiple domains there, but I would say the sort of the tools, the understanding and rigor and attention and intentionality to support resilience, in any intervention that you do. And thirdly, then the kind of more joined up pieces around it. So beauty, isn't it? Rebecca, do you want to, Johnny, do you want to speak to that? You're in the work.
Would you like me to answer that?
When you go for it, Johnny, and then I can jump in as well.
I think it's interesting in terms of resistance. I think I with my client base, and it's a small client base at the moment, I'm not seeing resistance. I'm seeing demand. They want to work on their resilience. So I've not really come across that as such, if I was to be really honest with that. I'm seeing more a demand for it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Johnny. I mean, the demand is there, sadly, I think, at the moment in some respects, in terms of the struggles that people have. I think what's quite interesting about that resistance is when people have an identity that's linked to, I am a resilient person. We are a resilient team, we are a resilient organization, and therefore, how will this really help me? So it's actually understanding, really noticing kind of what's going on in that dynamic, and then how can the resilience work support that? Because, you're not always working with people at fragmentation. So it might be that somebody actually has high resilience at the moment and is on that whoosh or that breakthrough, that piece. So it's then understanding what is creating that for me. What is that about? How am I creating that ability to be this resilient person at the moment? And therefore, when I hit challenge, I can stay there, or I can actually more easily get back there. So it's rather than saying, it's creating an awareness and an understanding and another layer of how to sustain themselves as resilient people in a world that is pretty challenging. So it's helping them understand that it's not, some people see it as a weakness.
And it's not a thing that you just all of a sudden, I know how to use Excel now.
Yes.
Right. I know this stuff. This is a knowledge bank that I now know, and I don't ever need to revisit it, because resilience is contextual. It's continually changing and continually under demand. So the more complex that your clients are going into, the more that will change. I do want to offer a story into you on this. Long time ago, after the original research, I was in a workshop around this. It was in and one person said to me in the break, I can't remember when it was maybe around lunchtime, "This isn't doing it for me." And I as a practitioner, I didn't need to own that, right? And so I actually said, "That's really interesting. I wonder what it is about that's for you that therefore matters." At the end of the day, this person came up to me and their head had spun 180 degrees and said, "I need to do this. I need to do this stuff. This is completely, I know what this is." So not owning, but providing, if you like, what we call is in our values, revealing the truth. This is something that was real. It was a data point for them. What did it mean behind it? The resistance was related to their resilience or their lack thereof, and they got that in the afternoon. So, I think resistance is a bit of data, and actually being, being hijacked by it, but enabling your client through it is the way to go. That's what I would say. We do have another question about the practicality from Lenka. Thanks, Lenka. Oh, I'm so excited if you come in. What literally are you submitting, I think was the question. So there are two things. There's that sort of positioning statement, which you can do for real and use therefore with your clients or internally, right? That's what we would wish you for. So I am Jenny Campbell and this is what my offer is, okay? And then the other thing is your learning essay against the 9 criteria that Rebecca was talking about, that you go into in great depth in module 3, but it's already being signalled right up front in the programme. So, you're in the work, you're assimilating the work. You are, working with clients and groups of clients and in supervision and with your colleagues. And then you kind of got to bring that together and describe it in your way. And there are many ways that people submit, but in a learning essay. So I hope that's okay. And, we tend to mark in 2 phases. So most people are coming through around the end of the summer period, and we're marking like mad. Any sort of extra bits that have to come in, and then we all do a big celebration, and we've got our graduation next week. So so anything else? Mandy, did you notice anything?
There's one more question. I'm conscious of the time, Jenny. So just a very quick one, if you can manage it. Matthew's asked, how do you navigate cultural barriers to the work? Stiff upper lip, masculinity, need to be stronger, etc. If you've got just a minute to speak on that before you close, that would be marvellous.
So if you don't mind, I'll take this again, just with the time. I have a sense of you really wishing something for your client or for your organisation, Matthew, despite the fact that there's a whole ton of badges of honours and resistance to this. You have to think about your own resilience in offering something that you could potentially be continually ignored in, okay? So that's one thing. The second is obviously to look for ambassadors or people who show up and are interested in this and create some kind of understanding. But if I was to advise organisations fundamentally about this, this is essentially about productivity. This is about, we see a doubling of people's capacity if they are actually shifting from bounce back upwards. We see faster decision making. We see less tension. We remove procrastination. We don't shoot ourselves in the foot with short-termism. Okay, we have adaptive capacity, looking for more proactively where are we and how to pace our workload. Right. These things are performance related. So the bottom line, and this is where the Josh Bersin thing I think is very, very strong. If you want a sustainable performing organisation or team or individual, if you don't pay attention to this, you're on a short-term fuse. So I hope that's answered. It's hardcore. Soft skills, often people talk about soft skills. These are hard skills. And this is one of the sort of, killer apps, if you like, into this. It would really, really, it gets into the nub and the jugular of actually unlocking performance in a different way.